to apologize first. I know it's late, and a lot of you had a long day, and I apologize for running over time. But these last few slides, very quick, very short, but very informative. And I didn't want to go without actually going through these last few slides. So one more thing. Never underestimate the use of a good question in a debate. Simply knowing and asking the right questions could change the course of a discussion and put you back in the driver's seat. That's where you belong, and that's where you want to be. All right? So here are the 3 little questions that I promised you earlier, and they're also called Columbo questions. If you recognize that little character before, Greg Koukl, who's the founder of the Christian apologetics ministry, Stand to Reason, he calls them Columbo questions, and they were named after the famous actor Peter Falk in the 70s hit TV show. So 3 small questions that can be really mighty allies when you're out there in the front lines and you're defending the faith. The first one is asking the question to somebody, what do you mean by that? The second one is, how did you come to that conclusion? And finally, the third one is, have you considered the implications of your view? When I first heard these 3 questions, I wrote them down on a yellow sticky, and I put them on my computer at home, on my laptop, and I put one at work, because I never know when I was going to use those, and there were times where I needed to use those, and we'll see why here in a minute. So the Columbo tactic, as Mr. Koukl describes it, he says this about it. He says, the Christian goes on the offensive in a disarming way with carefully selected questions productively advance the conversation. So the tactic is therefore used to gain information, but also to keep you out of the hot seat. That's the purpose of these questions. It's also to reverse the burden of proof. Sometimes in a witnessing conversation, when you're asking these questions, hey, are you a good person? Have you lied or whatever? They'll quickly throw it back on you and say, well, have you lied? Have you sinned? So what you want to do is quickly put the burden of proof back on them, especially if somebody's posing an initial objection to you. And finally, the purpose of the Columbo tactic is to indirectly exploit a weakness or a flaw in someone's view. Now, there's nothing dirty or tricky about this, and the goal here that we need to keep in mind is that this is for clarity, not domination. And that's very important. If we're going with meekness and fear in preaching the gospel and doing a bit of swordplay here when we're fighting the good fight of the faith, it's not about domination, it's about clarity. Okay, so the first application question, what do you mean by that? Is a clarification inquiry that tells you what your opponent thinks, so you don't have to misunderstand or misrepresent his view. That's the last thing you want to do, is misrepresent somebody's view. At the same time, it forces him to think more clearly about his own statements. Once again, it clarifies the statement. So, for example, when a skeptic complains that the Bible has changed many times, the Christian response, or the Christian response in this case, should be, oh, how so? Everybody say after me, oh, how so? Perfect. Yeah, you guys are ready. Okay. Now remember, when you do this, you want to keep your tone inquisitive and mild at all times, all right? The next question is very important. It's one of the most important in the Columbo tactic. How did you come to that conclusion? And this could be asked a number of different ways. For example, why do you believe that? Or how do you know that? Or even you can say, what are your reasons for thinking that you're right? It really puts the burden back on them. In each case, you're reversing the burden of proof and putting it back on the person making the claim where it belongs, right with them. Okay? So the next time an atheist objects and says, the Bible is full of fairy tales, respond by saying, why would you believe something like that? All right? It really helps to put it back on them. And then finally, the third application, have you considered? All right? should be finished in a way that's relevant to the issue at hand. Whatever you're talking about at that time, you should end it with something relevant. Here you're offering an alternative view that gently dismantles the opponent's case, or at the very least exposes a very serious flaw in their argument. So for example, let's say you've been speaking with someone who believes that there's absolutely nothing wrong with abortion. All right, nothing morally wrong about it. And you've tried, gently of course, to explain to them that abortion is the taking of an innocent human life and that God sees it as murder, all right? But the pro-choice proponent doesn't see things that way, all right? Instead, she immediately protests in anger and fires back with, "You shouldn't judge people," or what's mostly a non-believer's famous line from the Bible, "Judge not, lest ye be judged," right? So the Christian response to someone who says, "You shouldn't judge people," put it back on them and say, "Have you considered that you just did?" See, what people don't realize is that while they may think that we're judging them, but actually we're coming to them with the truth and love, and they come back and make a statement like that, like you're judging people, they're actually casting a judgment on us too. So put it back on them and tell them, do you realize what you're doing? Chances are they don't. So throughout, it's critically important that your tone remain gracious throughout the whole time. Otherwise, your opponent will become even more defensive than they already are. So the best way to respond to an objection like that, obviously is, once again, have you considered that you just did? Okay, any questions?
What was the third question?
Okay, the third question was, have you considered the implications of your view? And that one, once again, after have you considered, you want to end it with something relevant to the issue at hand, all right? Okay, real quick, summary. In summary, throughout this period of instruction, we defined what apologetics is and we learned why we use it, why it's important in evangelism. We also identified the 10 big questions and objections and learned how to effectively answer them. We also engaged in a mock debate, which I hope you found fun and interesting, and also better prepared you for when you go out there tomorrow. And you practice the responses to give to other people too. But we also introduced and learned to apply the 3 little questions, or the Columbo questions. And I hope that those questions will become a good ally for you when you're out there witnessing. So thanks a million. I appreciate you listening.